Okay, sounds good.
Alright, I'm Artek, this is not host Mark, and we are together. We cancel each other out, and we're just Eric and Mark. Anyway, tell me about Plotinus.
Um, well, he's a third century AD philosopher, and he's following in the tradition of Plato. And according to him, he's just reiterating what Plato's already said. But I mean, in reality, he is saying things that are different than Plato, and expanding on also what Aristotle was getting at too. Um,
Give
I
me
mean, he
some
talks about a whole bunch of stuff.
examples.
I don't know what you want to know about. But what's that?
Give me some examples of things, positions that he asserted or whatever.
Okay, so I mean, his ontology is hierarchical. Um, so at the top is the good, which transcends and goes beyond being, substance, um, thinking, intellect. Um, it's purely one. It doesn't even have, so it doesn't even contemplate himself, because that would require that he have being, and he doesn't think because that would require there to be otherness, because there has to be a thinker and a thought, and a thinking to have thinking. Um, so that would make him a multiplicity, which he can't be, because the highest thing has to be completely alone and singular and by itself. So he says the one or the good or God is willing. So he's free will. He doesn't have free will. He doesn't possess free will, but he is free will. Um, and then it gets kind of confusing here. So there seems to be, so the dyad comes from the one, and the dyad at first, if you can talk about it in that way, because it's in eternity and it's outside time, so that gets confusing. But in explaining it, he has to talk about it in temporal, language. Um, so the dyad is not yet differentiated from the one. It's the same as the one, and is united with the one, and is the one, really. It sees the one, and then looking to the one, it receives thinking, because it sees itself as different than the one. So that, I mean, there's where you get the law of identity. Like the first law of identity, A equals A, is that, which, according to Plotinus, would be not really one, because a true one would just be A. It wouldn't be A equals A. He doesn't say that explicitly, but and then you have later people that read Plotinus, like German idealists and such, um, that go off on that and use Plotinus to explain that concept. And then so the dyad thinks, and then it becomes intellect. So intellect, in thinking, has being, because it thinks itself and thinks what it received from the good, and the powers it received from the good. And so it creates substance, it creates being. And because in the process of thinking, which requires it to be a multiplicity and an otherness in unity, however, um, it, it it can't get to the one. It can't become the one again, because it's trying to find out where it came from, but it can't do that because of what it is thinking. And therefore, it generates everything. So it generates all the forms and all the beings and everything that exists, um, in an effort to create the infinite everything, because it can't have the one. It can't be singular, so it's going to possess everything that it possibly can in order to be that unity that it is. But it also, communes with the one. It's very tied to the
All
one
right,
and the
well
good.
let me respond there. That's really interesting stuff. I liked it a lot. I think it's I don't know some initial thoughts to it, but
Okay, yeah.
it first of all the idea that there's a time independent one. Well, I like the link between the time independence notion, will, and conditionality. namely something that exists purely in time and not in space, is going to be something that can move freely about time and not be subject to the finality of causal relationships as per the physical
So,
world. So
so
hold
to
on,
be
let me
clear,
finish.
though, I
Hold on,
mean,
let me finish the thought. Hold on, let
yeah.
me finish this thought. And not be subject to, not be subject, not be subject to something in the physical world. Right,
Hello.
not be subject to the finality of causality in the physical world. So okay, so here's the thing. Hi, Susie. When we when we take action, it in the physical world, it causes impacts that are the that change our perception of other objects in space, or other objects in space in ways that persist, so that such that their identity to us as an entity or a thing becomes different and includes the impacts we've taken upon them. Here's the difference with conditionality, of course, is we can run through a conditionality chain and we don't end up with something that we can't undo. I can go like, well, let me try this filter. Okay, well let me add this filter on top of it. Let me add this one on top of it to look at a picture, right? And then I go undo,
Mhm.
undo, 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 undo. Now, in the physical world, time has continued to pass um, as normal, but functionally in the metaphysical world of your conception and working with this time object, no time has passed insofar as nothing you've done with it at this point is not undoable, and the
Mhm.
the object waits patiently for you to continue working on it or not as you see fit. All those sort of things that it doesn't decay at all. It's not like you come back to it later and it's it got the flies got on it, you know.
Yeah, right.
So
Yeah.
that's why it's time independent. So when you say will, that is the nature of ontology, and you say additionally that the multiplicity that is the individual as thinking is necessarily going to seek the source of one is nice and poetic, but doesn't really have any particular warrant to it. And um, other than that, I like that stuff that you said. I thought it was interesting. Let me ask
Mhm.
you this: Plotinus, was he embarrassed that his name sounded kind of like vagina?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
It doesn't say. He doesn't mention it in any of his writings.
Yeah, well, I mean, his student Porphyry wrote everything, so he's probably an
Porphyry.
ENTP. He writes like an ENTP. He probably was real lazy and was just like, I don't want to do this, and let his student do it. He just talked about it. That's what happened.
Okay, well, Plotinus, you were good for a video. Thanks. Good job, ancient Greek guy. Good job not having smart for learning shit and sharing it with us.
Yeah, no
And
worries.
good job, Susie, for popping in last minute to give us the icy stare.